Harrisburg Telegraph, August 1, 1914. King George, in final effort, appeals to Russian Emperor to avert European war. France orders mobilization. War only matter of hours. German ministers leave posts. Scene when stock exchange closed. German Emperor reviewing troops. The insert figures are J.P. Morgan left and Secretary of the Treasury McAdoo. The background photograph is of the scene in front of the New York Stock Exchange when it closed its doors for the first time in 40 years. Four big New York brokerage firms have been forced to the wall as a result of the agitation in stock caused by the European crisis, and fear is felt for a half-dozen others. In lower picture, Emperor William can be identified by cross. At his side is Count von Moltke, head of the German army. Germany sends ultimatums to France and Russia, all countries ready to fight. France secretly mobilizes her forces and is prepared for eventualities. French Foreign Office officials issue statement in which they say all prospects of a peaceful settlement are hopeless. Strict censorship in European countries withholds news of military activities. King George forwards message to Russian Emperor urging efforts to avert a general war. And now I commend you to God. Go to church and kneel before God and pray for his help for our gallant army, says Emperor in war speech. By Associated Press, Berlin, August 1. The German Emperor made a war speech to the people of Berlin yesterday in which he expressed the hope that if he was unable to induce his opponents to maintain peace, he would wield the sword and show his enemies what it means to provoke Germany. The Emperor has summoned the Reichstag to meet on Tuesday and bear the decision of the Emperor and the Bundesrat, and, if necessary, to vote a war crisis. 5,000 persons assembled in front of the palace and cheered the Emperor and the Empire. During the demonstration, Emperor William appeared in a window and addressed his subjects as follows: "A fateful hour has fallen for Germany. Envious peoples everywhere are compelling us to our just defense. The sword has been forced into our hands. I hope that if my efforts at the last hour do not succeed in bringing our opponents to see eye to eye with us, and in maintaining the peace, we shall, with God's help, so wield the sword that we shall restore it to its sheath again with honor. War would demand of us an enormous sacrifice in property and life, but we should show our enemies what it means to provoke Germany, and now I commend you to God. Go to church and kneel before God and pray for his help for our gallant army." Paris, August 1. An official decree orders a general mobilization of the French army beginning tomorrow. London, August 1. The usual flood of telegrams from the continent to London was suddenly stopped this afternoon, and only a few isolated messages were delivered, and these were either belated or lacking in importance. Telephonic communication also ceased. Ultimatums were sent today by Germany to France and Russia. Russia was ordered by Emperor William to stop mobilization within 12 hours expiring at noon, while France was given 18 hours to declare her attitude in certain contingencies. Italy probably will remain neutral as she regards the campaign of her allies, Germany and Austria, as an aggressive war in which she is not called on to intervene. King George made a final effort to maintain peace by telegraph to Emperor Nicholas of Russia. The Bank of England discount rate went up to 10% today, the highest level it has ever reached. Continental banks also raised their rates. France was reported to have ordered general mobilization of her forces, as the prospects of peace are thought hopeless. Strict censorship in European countries kept back news of military movements. Communication by telegram between England and France is interrupted, the governments being desirous of preventing leakage of information. Japan will not intervene unless British interests in the Far East are endangered. The German ambassador was reported to have left St. Petersburg. London, August 1. King George, in a final effort to prevent the outbreak of a general European war and the meeting of millions of men in armed conflict today at the 11th hour, sent a dispatch to Emperor Nicholas of Russia, and his message was understood to contain an ultimatum appealing for preservation of peace. His Majesty's action was taken after an audience with Premier Asquith at 2 o'clock this morning, when the war clouds were blackest. At the same time from Rome came the news, published in the Messaggero, that Italy had decided to remain neutral unless attacked. While this information was not confirmed, it was said in official circles to have caused no surprise. At the Italian embassy in London, the belief was expressed that should Italy remain neutral, with a possibility left open of her turning against her allies, Germany and Austria-Hungary, the latter nation would be reluctant to embark on a general European war. Time limit expires at noon today. On the other hand, the fact stood out that Germany had taken a very firm attitude and had asked Russia to suspend the mobilization of her forces within a time limit of 12 hours, expiring at noon today. She also had asked France to define within 18 hours the attitude she would assume in case of war by Germany and Austria against Russia. It was pointed out in authoritative circles that France's attitude could only be that under the terms of her treaty with Russia, she would be compelled to intervene. German circles today showed considerable uneasiness all over the world. The German forces in China were being concentrated at Tsingtao. The German consul general left his post at Cape Town, and German ships were ordered to seek neutral ports. In regard to the Far East, the Japanese ambassador in London said today that as long as the warships belonging to the nations composing the Triple Alliance remained at Tsingtao, Japan would take no action against them, but should they attack British interests or should Tsingtao be attacked, a situation would arise which would be dealt with by Japan in the spirit of the Anglo-Japanese alliance. France would not be attacked by Germany. At the German embassy, reference was made to German mention of French neutrality in her note to the French government, and it was said that this seemed to imply that France herself would not be attacked by Germany. Telephonic communication between London and Paris was interrupted today, the respective governments having taken over the service in order to prevent the leakage of news. Communication between Paris and Brussels was similarly interrupted. In regard to the financial situation, the Bank of England, which was again called on to supply an unprecedented amount of gold, raised its rate today to 10%, which is higher than it has been since the Indian Mutiny in 1867. Many hardy Americans still insist on obtaining passports from the United States Embassy, mainly for Germany and France, in spite of warnings that their chances for obtaining transportation are slim. They declare the reason to be, in most cases, to get members of their families out of those countries, but some of them say they have important business to transact. French say there is no hope of peace. By Associated Press, Paris, August 1st. At the French Foreign Office today, officials declared they considered it would now be folly to rely on any hope of a peaceful outcome of the crisis. France's efforts at Berlin, they said, had failed, and any glimmer of hope which had appeared had been immediately extinguished. The conditions under which the diplomatic conversations continued today made it, in the French official view, appear almost impossible to expect a satisfactory issue, and it was reluctantly admitted that war seemed to be only a question of hours. Sidelights on war situation, London. The Central News says the British Foreign Office this evening received an unofficial message to the effect that German mobilization had been ordered. New York, August 1st. Official notice was received at the Austrian-Hungarian consulate here today that the reserves had been called for general mobilization. How to get the 200,000 men back to Austria-Hungary was a problem. It was at first planned to have them sail on Italian steamers. These would have to pass Gibraltar, where they might be seized by England. London, August 1st. Information reached the French embassy here today that the German ambassador in Paris has intimated that he purposes to leaving his post tonight. Officials at the French embassy said, however, that efforts were still being made in various directions to maintain the peace. Continued on page 5.
The Seattle Star, August 1st, 1914. This is war. Herbert Quick, famous author and philosopher, pictured just such a war horror in his novel When Glory Ceased, which appeared in the Star last December, as is now menacing Europe. A war made more horrible than any in history by airships and other inventions to make the killing of human beings more easy. Two navies of airships clashed 500 feet from Earth. Here is Quick's word picture. And the end was universal death. The two clouds coalesces by some baleful attraction and dropped a ghastly hail of dead men and humming engines. What had been the goodly shapes of men was only a reef of red remains and horrid ooze. There were no groans, no cries to God, no pleading for water, no ambulances, no nurses, nor need of them, none of the sweet offices of mercy, no mercy, none of the human mitigations of war, no humanity, no place for humanity. Deep as the drifts of snow in the Maine forest lay the debris, which streamed gasoline and blood. Germany recalls Russian ambassador. Kaiser says fight. Bulletin, Paris, August 1st. The wires crossing France-German frontier were cut by Germans this afternoon, severing telegraphic communication between the two countries. Paris, August 1st. England tonight formally assured France that the British would aid the French in the event of war with Germany. The German ambassador at St. Petersburg is today reported to have demanded his passports and left for the frontier. The German ambassador at Paris will leave for Berlin, it is said, tonight. This means Germany is ready to declare war. The United States government at Washington, D.C., is informed that the United States ambassador has been asked to take care of German affairs in France. France today ordered a general mobilization of its entire military and naval forces Sunday. These acts of overt hostilities, as they are interpreted in international affairs, actually extend the Austrian-Serbian breach to German, French, and Russian territory today. At any moment is expected a declaration of war by Austria against Russia. Austria's comprehensive mobilization indicates an expected move against the Tsar. Austria's railroads have been entirely reserved for military purposes. Every country in Europe is on nervous edge today. The outlook is more pessimistic than ever. A last effort at mediation was made in a telegram from King George of England today to the Tsar. That it was a vain hope is indicated by the fact that the English fleet has mobilized in the North Sea, ready to engage the German squadron off the coast of Holland. Little actual fighting is reported today. The Serbians are in retreat after 3 days of fighting from the southern bank of the River Save. The Serbian government declared the retreat is intentional in order to draw the Austrians into the interior for strategic purposes. As matters stand today, Austria, Serbia, and Montenegro are already mobilized and at war. Russia is completing its mobilization. Germany is under martial law and probably mobilizing, though censorship prevents all information. A similar condition exists in France. The British Army and Navy are prepared to assist France and Russia. The lesser countries of Europe are becoming involved. Bulgaria is preparing to help Germany and Austria. Romania is taking preliminary steps for a mobilization against Bulgaria, its old enemy. Italy, though favoring neutrality, is allied with Germany and Austria. Spain has concentrated its fleet to help England, France, and Russia. Seattle to offer prayers. Prayers will be offered in most of Seattle's churches tomorrow for prevention of the threatened European war. A meeting of the Cabinet of the Ministerial Federation has been called by Dr. M.A. Matthews of the First Presbyterian Church for Monday noon. It is expected that arrangements will be made to conduct simultaneous services and to designate a day of prayer next week to ask for prevention of the war. Liner bearing rich war prize right into Johnny Bull's hands. New York, August 1st. The North German Lloyd steamship Kron Prinzessin Cecile is due at Plymouth, England, Monday. Officials of the line here expressed anxiety today concerning the reception it is likely to get if in the meantime war has been declared between Germany and England. The present crisis did not reach its present acute stage until it was too late to recall the liner by wireless. The Kron Prinzessin Cecile has on board $10,700,000 in gold and $3,300,000 in silver. Germany invites trouble. London, August 1st. Intensely critical conditions prevail today along the Franco-German frontier. A message from Paris said the French believed Germany was trying deliberately to provoke a clash by repeated acts of petty aggression. A German cavalry force is reported to have entered France and then been quickly withdrawn. 4 French locomotives were seized by Germans at Montreuil. At Amanvillers, Germans confiscated French rolling stock, cut the wires, and forced French railroad men to walk back across the frontier. French automobile parties on the German side of the frontier were deprived of their cars and driven into France on foot. French and German military patrols were within sight of one another on either side of the frontier. No cause for U.S. to fear. The United States is in a better condition financially today than it has been for some time, and I can see no reason for Americans to fear money stringency, said M.B. Salner, cashier of the Union Savings and Trust Co., today in reviewing the developments of the past few days in the war situation in Europe. This country is admirably situated. We are a great big nation, way off here by ourselves. We have Canada on the north, Mexico on the south, and the Pacific Ocean before us, we are surrounded by peace. Internally, we are sound, and we are so big within ourselves, so tremendously prosperous, we are practically invulnerable, financially speaking. Face era of prosperity. We are on the verge of an era of great prosperity. We are harvesting record crops this year. The Panama Canal is opening this year. All things are favorable. If there is to be a great European war, it will be a benefit to this country, for the Europeans must have our foodstuffs. Germany's supremacy will cease, and we will have to start manufacturing supplies. No, I can see nothing but prosperity ahead. I was glad to hear the closing of the New York Stock Exchange. It was a wise move. It prevents the unloading of securities on the exchange. Closing market good move. People with securities will go to banks now. Instead, if they can't sell their securities, there will be no excitement, such as a continued operation of the stock exchange would create. The gold taken out of the country at the first war move will have no ill effect. In exchange for the gold, we received Europe's bills, which guarantee ample security. And now this gold will begin returning to us rapidly in exchange for foodstuffs. New York Exchange still closed. New York, August 1st. The stock exchange did not reopen today. Only a few stragglers were on the floor at 10 a.m., the usual opening hour. Liners halted. New York, August 1st. Transatlantic service between New York and European ports outside of England has been suspended by the Cunard Line and the International Marine Company. Herrick to represent Germany. Paris, August 1st. The German ambassador here today asked United States Ambassador Herrick if he would be willing to represent Germany at the French capital in the event of Franco-German hostilities. Herrick referred the request to President Wilson. It is expected the latter will give his consent. Herrick has been recalled from his diplomatic post, was to have paid his farewell visit to President Poincaré Monday, and expected to sail with Mrs. Herrick on the steamship La France the following Sunday. Bankers hold off big war. London, August 1st. European financial powers are bringing strong pressure to bear tonight in an effort to avert a general conflict. It was reported that the bankers of Berlin and Paris are responsible for the sudden resumption of negotiations between Premier Viviani of France and the German ambassador in Paris after a rupture seemed imminent. Bankers figure a war will cost 17% of the entire wealth of the powers. By William Philip Sims, Paris, August 1st. Premier Viviani and the German ambassador here held two conferences here today relative to France's intentions in the event of war between Germany and Russia. The ambassador presented his original request for information Friday night, saying he would call for an answer at noon today. He kept the appointment punctually. Gets unsatisfactory reply. The only reply he received, however, was a declaration that France must consult its own interest at this time. After communicating with Berlin, he notified the premier that Germany could not accept the statement as final. He insisted on another audience. This was granted, but its outcome was not known. Paris is excited. There is the most intense excitement in the city. Most of the motor buses have been withdrawn for army use, and urban transportation is much hampered. This afternoon, a military dirigible with a full crew flew over Paris. Its appearance was greeted with frenzied applause. When Europe lines up on battlefield, the soldiers in this diagram have been drawn on a scale of 400,000 men to the inch to picture the strength of the armies of the several countries and reserves. Active army. Germany, 658,000 Russia, 1,200,000 France, 609,000 Austria, 420,000 England, 250,000 Italy, 255,000 Serbia, 195,000. Reserves. Germany, 1,323,000 Russia, 700,000 France, 761,000 Austria, 381,000 England, 489,000 Italy, 390,000 Serbia, 400,000. Total. Germany, 1,981,000 Russia, 1,900,000 France, 1,370,000 Austria, 801,000 England, 739,000 Italy, 645,000 Serbia, 595,000. Serbia's reserves include every able-bodied man and many women, not usually classed as reserves.
The Daily Missoulian, August 2nd, 1914. Sunday's sun rises on a grim scene this morning. Spain and Sweden, of all Europe, are out of the stir of strife. 3 cheers for war. With startling rapidity, European crisis develops and nations rush to war. London, August 1st. Events in the European crisis develop today with startling rapidity. The German ultimatum to Russia, demanding that Russia stop the mobilization of her army, expired at noon, and at 5:15 o'clock in the afternoon, the German emperor signed a mobilization order. At 7:30 o'clock, the German ambassador at St. Petersburg, Count von Portales, delivered a declaration of war in the name of his government to the Russian government, and the entire staff of the embassy immediately left St. Petersburg. Although after the warlike speeches delivered by the German emperor and the imperial chancellor at Berlin on Friday, no other result could be expected, hopes that the dread event might be averted have been raised by the intervention of King George in St. Petersburg and the fact that the German Reichstag was not to be convened until Tuesday. Hence, the actual declaration of war had not been expected for another day or two. Now the die is cast, and Europe is to be plunged into a general war, which has been the apprehension of European statesmen for years. It is now only a question of how soon a state of actual war will exist between Germany and France. Late tonight, placards were posted in Paris calling for general mobilization, and the German ambassador, although he had not been handed his passports, was preparing to leave the French capital. It is not known at exactly what hour Germany's ultimatum to France, asking that country to define what attitude she would assume in case of war by Germany and Austria against Russia, was to expire, but it is believed it will not be long before diplomatic relations will be ruptured or war declared. Kaiser explains, the German emperor and his advisors have maintained to the last that they made supreme efforts for the sake of peace, and that the last of the series of earnest appeals from Emperor William to Emperor Nicholas, a telegram repudiating responsibility for the calamity threatening the world, on grounds that while Germany was engaged in mediating with Austria-Hungary at Russia's request, Russia, by her general mobilization, was threatening Germany's safety. The first shots in the Russo-German War were exchanged between patrols this afternoon near Prostkin, 120 miles to the southeast of Königsberg. The only redeeming feature of the darkest prospect with which Europe has been faced for half a century is that Italy has declared her neutrality. But how long that neutrality can be maintained is an exceedingly debatable question. Great Britain's position already has been defined by Premier Asquith in the British Parliament. He declared that she is under no formal obligations to go to the assistance of France in the event of an European war. The British government, however, has made full preparations in both services for whatever may happen. The lineup. The present position, therefore, is that Russia, France, and Serbia are arrayed on one side against Austria-Hungary and Germany on the other. How long the warfare will be confined to this plain, it is impossible to foretell, nor can it be foretold whether Belgium and Holland will be able to maintain their neutrality against their powerful neighbor, or whether Great Britain will find herself compelled to send an expeditionary force to attempt to preserve that neutrality. Another factor which as yet has not been given much consideration is the attitude of Turkey, which, if she has sufficiently recovered from the effects of her late war with Italy, may be able to throw considerable weight into the scale. It is generally understood that Germany has an effective understanding with Turkey, which may lead to interesting developments. Shocked. London, August 3rd. Pleasure-loving Londoners, issuing by thousands from the theaters tonight, were confronted by screaming newspaper placard announcing that Germany had declared war on Russia. For the first time, the full significance of the fate overhanging Europe appeared to strike the ordinary citizen with full force, and he began with real seriousness to ask himself what part England was to play in the great impending tragedy. Leading business and commercial men had been in a state of apprehension over the course events were taking and saw themselves face to face with great losses, perhaps ruination, but the customary life in the great city had gone on, undisturbed by the echoes of war which seemed far away. Although some unusual commotion and military movement had been observable, most of the citizens did not realize war was near enough to involve Great Britain. People stopped on the sidewalks in anxious groups, discussing the expected news. but there was no unusual demonstrations except here and there collisions between little bands of Germans and Frenchmen as the result of their patriotic ardor. The greatest excitement was observed in the numerous foreign restaurants of the West End, especially in German haunts, where the crowds cheered Emperor William and sang The Watch on the Rhine and other patriotic songs. Asserts Russia is weak. Berlin, August 1st, special. The Militarer Wochenblatt, official military weekly newspaper, prints an article comparing the Austro-Hungarian and Russian armies to the disadvantage of the latter. It says the fighting strength of the Russian army is usually overestimated and that numbers are not decisive. The writer says in recent times Russia alone never defeated any army of equal rank and would not have been successful in defeating the Turks in the War of 1877 if she had not been aided by Romania. All-night session. Paris, August 2nd. The Council of Ministers, which held a late-night session to discuss the European situation, adjourned shortly after 4 o'clock this morning. It will continue discussion of the situation this Sunday afternoon. No announcement of the result of the deliberations has thus far been given out. Russians declare approval of war. Frenzied enthusiasm marks receipt of news in St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg, August 1st. Germany's declaration of war against Russia has provoked in the Russian capital a wonderful demonstration of patriotic enthusiasm. The German ambassador, Count von Portelez, at 7:30 o'clock in the evening, in the name of his government, sent to the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs official notification of the declaration of war, and 2 hours later an announcement to this effect was made to the people. Tonight the capital presents a spectacle of extraordinary animation. The Nevsky Prospect and all the leading thoroughfares are filled with war-frenzied people, marching in processions, carrying portraits of the emperor with flags waving and torches blazing. From time to time, there is an outburst of cheering and singing. Speakers fired with patriotic fervor harangue the crowds. In the front of Kazan Cathedral, each procession halts, and a sudden hush falls over the processionists. Then the strains of the national anthem sung in perfect harmony by a section of the procession rises in the air, the crowds listening silently with bared heads. Then the procession moves forward and the demonstrations are resumed with renewed ardor. Berlin enthusiastic when Emperor speaks. Berlin, August 1st. Throughout yesterday afternoon, Unter den Linden seemed to be the rendezvous for all Berlin. An enormous crowd gathering there and greeting the notable personages whom the exciting events of the day were bringing constantly to the castle. Last night, it was estimated 50,000 persons were gathered in front of the castle. They cheered the emperor and sang patriotic songs until he appeared at a window. A perfect tornado of enthusiasm greeted him. Then he made his address. The speech was thrice interrupted by vociferous cheering and hand-clapping, and at its conclusion, the emperor bowed low in all directions in acknowledgment of the ovation and retired from the window amid a renewal of frenzied demonstrations. Until today to think it over. Time limit of German ultimatum to France extended over Sunday. Report not confirmed. French ambassador denies, however, that his country dismissed the German representative in Paris, as was stated in early news of the day. London, August 1st. A central news dispatch from Paris says by common agreement the limit of Germany's ultimatum to France has been extended for 48 hours, until noon Monday. At the French embassy, it is said that there is no confirmation of the extension of the time limit of Germany's ultimatum to France. The embassy authorizes a denial of the report that the German ambassador in Paris has been handed his passports, and adds that if he should leave Paris tonight, as it was intimated he might do, it will be entirely on his own initiative, and would not, therefore, be regarded as a final step, as would be if he were handed his passports by the French officials. In Berlin, August 2nd. The emperor, speaking from a window of the castle last night to the crowds beneath, said, "I thank you for the love and loyalty shown me. When I enter upon a fight, let all party strife cease. We are German brothers and nothing else. All parties have attacked me in time of peace. I forgive them with all my heart. I hope and wish that the good German sword will emerge victorious in the right. The emperor's speech was greeted with tumultuous cheering. The imperial chancellor also addressed the assembly, saying, "All stand as one man for our emperor, whatever our opinions or our creeds." I am sure that all the young German men are ready to shed their blood for the fame and greatness of Germany. We can only trust in God, who hitherto has always given us victory. The imperial decree convokes the Reichstag on August 4th. German fleet sails with all lights out. Antwerp, August 1st. A dispatch from Flushing, Netherlands, to the metropole says that a tug in the North Sea tonight, 17 units of the German fleet proceeding towards the Skagerrak with lights out. Later they turn back. At the present time, there are several British squadrons cruising north of Flushing. Shots exchanged. Berlin, August 1st. A German patrol near Prostkan was fired on this afternoon by a Russian frontier patrol. The Germans returned the fire. There were no losses. Tsar has 1,200,000 men ready for war. Instantly, Russia will throw 1,200,000 men and 540 batteries of artillery, including 3,780 guns, into the conflict. The Tsar's war minister announces that there are 30 army corps ready for the call of battle. Each corps numbers 40,000 men, including 4,000 cavalry. The artillery includes 540 batteries, each with an average of 7 guns. This is the net fighting strength of the Tsar's European army. Behind this tremendous force lies the army of the Caucasus and the army of Asia.
The Cairo Bulletin, August 2nd, 1914. Germany in arms, issues declaration of war against Russia. All Europe involved, Americans fleeing. First shots fired between patrol at Russian frontier. Great Britain, unaffected by announcement, decides to remain neutral. Relief of U.S. citizens abroad is started. Feynman Belt crowded with German dreadnoughts. France orders general mobilization. Great Britain's preparations continue. Special to the Bulletin, Hearst International News, St. Petersburg, August 1st. A declaration of war was sent today by the German ambassador in the name of his government to the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs at 7:30 tonight. London, August 1st. An official Reuters message states that the Kaiser has ordered the mobilization or the entire military and naval forces of Germany. London, August 1st. The following official statement regarding war policy of England was given out tonight. The policy of Great Britain will be unaffected by the announcement. Italy has decided to remain neutral on the grounds she alleges no casus foederis has arisen for her intervention. Under the present terms of the Triple Alliance, this merely shows how brittle an instrument the treaty is, and Italy will have to settle later with her partners as to the justification for her action or inclination. The French government has never been directly or indirectly led to believe that Great Britain was pledged to any particular method of discharging her obligations to France, and she retained strictly the spirit and letter of the understanding. The government has not decided whether or not to interfere in the European war which has broken out. They have always reserved to themselves the right of determining how they shall play their part in the Triple Entente. No particular course of action has been decided upon, although both the Admiralty and the War Office have worked out various schemes concluded on page 3, columns 3 and 4. German torpedo boats have begun active operations. Attempt to cut cable communications to Russia by way of Rodvig, Denmark. U.S. to take charge of foreign embassies. President Wilson and leaders in Congress agree on legislation to permit foreign ships to come under American register. Associated Press, Copenhagen, August 1st. German torpedo boat destroyers operating outside Danish sea territory made an unsuccessful attempt to cut cable communication to Russia by way of Rodvig, Denmark. Washington, August 1st. Germany, Great Britain and France formally asked the United States to take charge of their embassies throughout hostilities. In case of emergencies, the United States will act for the powers involved, the ambassador and ministers being instructed. St. Petersburg, August 1st. Count von Portales and the entire staff of the German embassy left St. Petersburg tonight after the declaration of war was delivered. London, August 1st. Diplomatic relations between Germany and Russia were severed at noon today. The German ambassador at St. Petersburg is leaving Russia, and a dispatch from Amsterdam says it is reported there that the Russian ambassador to Berlin has demanded his passports. With all the powers continuing their extensive war preparations, King George of England has made a final appeal to the Tsar of Russia for peace. A lengthy message from King George was received at St. Petersburg today. German shipping ordered to neutral ports. Paris, August 1st. Evidence that a general war is inevitable comes from Berlin in the shape of orders to all German shipping to make for the nearest neutral port. This is the only possible action that will save German shipping from capture by hostile warships. It is expected that the United States will be asked to act at both Berlin and St. Petersburg. United States Ambassador Herrick at Paris has been asked by the German ambassador if he would serve Germany in, concluded on page 6 columns 2 and 3. Triple Entente and Triple Alliance and their war strength. The Triple Entente, England, France and Russia, and the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, and Italy, form the two alignments of the six powers of Europe. Generally speaking, a war between two members or opposing alliances would mean a war of the six nations. England, France, and Russia are expected to back up each other in any trouble with either Germany, Austria, or Italy. Such is the understanding expressed more or less loosely, but strongly enough to have maintained the peace of Europe for many years. Germany has notified France that she must keep her hands off the trouble of Austria and Serbia. But Russia, European statesmen believe, will be driven to protect Serbia against Austria. Since Germany backs Austria, that would bring the Germans into the struggle. France, England, and Italy might also be drawn in. To confine the war to Austria and Serbia, or rather to prevent it, if possible, is the effort of the chancelleries of Europe at the moment. Sir Edward Grey, Foreign Minister of Great Britain, has already sounded the foreign ministers of Germany, Russia, France, and Italy, and has made considerable progress. The smaller countries of Europe, like Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, Spain, Portugal, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden would not be involved, but their territories would likely be overrun by the armies of the contenders. Of course, the Slav countries, Romania and Bulgaria and Montenegro and Greece, might easily become involved. The war strength of the opposing alliances, according to figures of 1913, was as follows. Triple Alliance, Army on war footing, 8,603,150, naval ships in commission, 612. Triple Entente, Army on war footing, 8,972,615, naval ships in commission, 1,340. Never before in the history of the world has it been possible to organize armies of such enormous size. A war between such forces would, if carried on for a year, lay Europe in waste, beside which that of the Napoleonic Wars would be child's play.